Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're ready to actually store a user's avatar file name in our database, right? And then load that value and actually display it on the front end of our website. Let's jump into the action. So if I visit my profile and click Manage Avatar, before I actually fill out this form and upload a new photo of myself, let's first go into our user controller. So search for usercontroller.php. Okay, and below these two lines where we're actually storing that file, on our hard drive, right below that, let's just update the database. So we already have $user, which is a metaphor for the currently logged in user. It's a metaphor, it's a model, and in Laravel, a model can easily update, the appropriate values in the database. So we could literally just say $user, look inside it for its avatar property, and set that to equal, right? And then just set it to whatever we want it to be. So I would just set it to be $file name, right? So that's going to be that randomly generated string of text.jpg. And then after that line, you do want to call, user, look inside it and call the save method. Let's give this a save and let me show you what that does for us. So now if I fill out the form and choose this photo of myself and click save, whoops, we would still want to return a string of text that says thank you or redirect them back, but we can do that later. For now, the point is that if you find your files for this project and you go into storage and you go into app and then public and avatars, that new file that I just uploaded is here. And there we see its file name, right? It's one-the-string.jpg. Better yet, if we go into our database now and look at your users table, perfect. That exact file name was stored in the database in that avatar column. So now watch how easy it is. You would just grab that value and then you could visit it at our URL /storage/avatars/ and then just paste in your clipboard. So now we just need to go connect the dots. Let's go into our layout file that controls the header of our application, and let's update this photo right here. Let me go to the home page so that it just looks at the user in session that's logged in and displays their avatar. So here's what I would do. Open up your layout.blade.php file. And for me, it's around line number 24, but we're looking for this link. Inside the A element, you'll see an image tag, right? So an img, and we're interested in the source value on the image. So instead of this hard-coded, HTTPS gravatar, let's hollow out that value. And instead, it would be source equals, and then let's have double curly brackets. And actually, before the double curly brackets, but inside the quotes, it would be, right, /storage/avatars/ and then in the curly brackets, for something dynamic, it would just be, call the auth function, look inside that, call the user function, and look inside that for the avatar property. If we go ahead and save this, and then assuming you're logged in, if you refresh, beautiful. Now there's just one problem. We don't want to have to spell out this path, right, that comes before the dynamic value more than once. Because what if in the future we wanted to change where the images were stored? And imagine if we accidentally had pointed towards this path in 30 different Blade templates, right? Because remember, you have to not only show that here, but every time on a user's profile, every time they have a blog post, on the single blog post view, so on and so forth. So not only do we not want to have to spell this out more than once, but also the fallback logic. In other words, if the user doesn't have a value in the database for avatar, we would want to show a fallback photo. So that logic to see should the fallback image be used instead, and this part of the path before the dynamic part, we don't want to have to spell that out more than once. We definitely don't want it littered throughout 30 different Blade files. Now, there's a million different ways that you could reduce that duplication, right? There's always 100 different ways to solve a problem in programming, but in Laravel, I think the best option, the best tool for this job would be something called an accessor. Now, what in the world is an accessor? Let me show you. So let's jump into our user model. So in the app folder, we have our models folder. Jump into the user.php file. Cool. So our user model is a metaphor for what a user is, and it's tied to the user's table, right? It's tied to a row in this table. And the way that I think of an accessor is, what if we wanted some sort of middle step between us and the value for the avatar column? Like, what if we wanted a chance to filter the value or make a decision before we sort of populate our metaphor of what a model, or excuse me, what a user is? Well, check this out. Back in our model, user.php, maybe right below this protected fillable equals, so just, in the user class, right about here, I would say protected function, and now the name of the function matters. I'm going to name it avatar, so avatar parentheses, curly brackets, because that's the name of the field or column that I'm trying to filter or, make a decision based upon, or change this value before it actually gets to us. If that doesn't make sense yet, that's okay. I think in about a minute or two, this will make perfect sense. Now, after the parentheses for our function name, so right here, let's say colon, and then uppercase attribute. And then do be sure to right click on this uppercase attribute and import that class. And we want this one that's Illuminate Database Eloquent Casts attribute. So click that, cool, that added the appropriate line up at the top. And now in the body of this function, we're gonna say return an attribute, colon, and we're gonna call a make method, semicolon at the end of that line. But in these make parentheses, we're gonna say get colon, and then give it a function. So just an anonymous function, so function, parentheses, curly brackets. Now, in the parentheses for this inline function here, let's say $value. And now I realize this code feels a bit convoluted, like what in the world is going on? But now from this point forward, it's very simple. Essentially, we are now in a position where we get to filter what the incoming value for avatar is going to be. In other words, if we didn't do anything, if in this function we literally just returned value, then this would all be for nothing, right? You'd be filtering without making any sort of change. Like, that's the incoming value from the database, and we'd just be returning the exact same thing. However, this is where we can have a little bit of conditional logic. So what I'm going to say is, if this field is empty, I don't want the value to just be itself. I want it to be a fallback image instead. If the field is not empty, let's use the value in the database, but let's prepend it with, /storage/avatars so that, the browser knows the correct URL to look up this value. So here's what I would do. You could set up like an if-else and return different values, or you could use something called a ternary operator. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, you might already be familiar with a ternary operator, but let's say return. And then for a ternary operator, first you set up the condition, like is it true or false? So I would just say, the incoming value. That's going to evaluate to true as long as it's not empty. If it's empty, it'll evaluate to false, right? If they don't have a value. So if it's true, question mark, what do you want to do if that value is true? Let's just set the value to, storage. Well, actually, let's have it begin with a slash. So /storage/avatars/ and then after the quotes, you would want to concatenate on $value, right? Whatever their value from the database was, just squish that onto this string. Okay, now to finish the ternary operator, if this is false, if it's not true, then you have a colon, and now you spell out the value for if it's false. If it's false, let's literally just set the value to / and then fallback-avatar.jpg. And let's end that line with a semicolon. We can go ahead and save this, but before we test it out in the browser, let's go make sure we actually have a fallback avatar JPEG file in the appropriate location. So here's what I would do. Remember our HTML templates folder that we've been borrowing code from? If you open that up, you'll see that there's a file in there called fallback-avatar.jpg. I just want you to place this in the public folder of your Laravel app. So in my case, Laravel projects. Remember, this is the root of our Laravel project, just in the public folder. And then I would just move the fallback avatar JPEG to live in this public folder, just like this. Cool, so with that in place, you could now go into your address bar, and say /fallback-avatar.jpg. Awesome. So now watch how easy it is to make our header dynamic. Do this with me. Go into your layoutblade.php file. And remember, we don't want the source to equal any sort of complex logic, because we don't want to have to spell out the path more than once. We don't want to have to spell out the logic for whether it should be the fallback image or not more than once. So now throughout our entire application, we can literally just set the source to equal. Let me hollow out those quotes. So it would just be source equals, double curly brackets, just call the auth function, look inside that, call the user function, look inside that for the avatar property. If we save that and you refresh, beautiful, I still see the Brad image. However, in this window, let me log in as Barksalot, right? So, beautiful. There is that fallback pencil image. So this is why this is so cool. Back in our Blade file, we just spelled this out, right? We're just looking at the avatar property on our user model, and it's that easy. It's dynamic. So that's the beauty, if we go back to our user model, of an accessor. It's a way to filter a value before the metaphor for the model gets populated, right? So we're saying anytime you try to get that value, the avatar value, because that's what we named the function, we can have our own logic. And we only need to spell it out once, right? So now throughout our entire application, we don't have to worry about, should we show a fallback? How do we spell out the path to the URL? So now even if we had 100 different Blade templates that needed to use avatar, we don't mind. We've already made our decision in one centralized location. Speaking of that, let's go actually update our Blade templates. So we've already updated our header. Now let's go update the single blog post screen, right? So if you view one of your individual posts, we want this little icon or this little photo right here to actually be the avatar for the author of the post. So for that, you would just jump into your singlepost.blade.php file. If you search for the opening image tag, for me it's around line 18. We would no longer want it to be a hard-coded, source equals HTTPS, so just hollow that out. And the quotes would be double curly brackets, just $post, look inside that for the user. It's not a function, it's just an object that lives on the post object. Look inside it, and then, we're just looking for the avatar property. You can save that. If we refresh, beautiful. But if we go look at a post by Barksalot, right? So if I go to, profile, Barksalot, and I view one of their individual posts, awesome, we see the fallback. Cool, let's really quick update the profile screen. So we would want to update the photo here and update the photos here. So if you just go into your user controller, and if you search for your function that's named profile, let's just pass into our Blade template a property on this array called avatar. Just because we're not already passing just literally the user, otherwise we could look it up directly in the Blade template. But for example, I would just give it another property of, avatar. You could make up anything, but set it to equal before the comma, or I just added a comma, but it would be, $user, look inside it for avatar. So now we would just go into our profile post.blade.php, and around line number 4, you'll see the top profile image. So just hollow out the source value on the image element. It would just be double curly brackets, $avatar. Just give that a save. Cool. Now to update these images, you could use the exact same property that we just set. Because we're on a user's profile, we can safely assume that all of these posts are by this user. However, this format of displaying a post, we're going to use this several places throughout our website. We're going to use this for the homepage feed, for the live search results, so on and so forth. So why don't we just make this little image actually be tied to the post that's being displayed instead of just for this current user profile URL. So in other words, here's what I would do. In that same file, just scroll down a little bit. So for me, it's around line 23, that image. Just hollow out the source value, and it would be double curly brackets, $post, look inside that for the user, look inside that for the avatar. If we give that a save, beautiful. Now for our final detail in this lesson, what if someone went to manage avatar and just sat here and uploaded, 100 different JPEGs all in a row? Well, the point that I'm trying to make is that we don't need to store all 100 photo files on our hard drive, right? That would be a waste of storage space. We only need to store the most recent photo that they're actually using, right? That the database is actually pointing towards. So what I would do is just whenever the user changes their avatar, I would just delete the previous value that was being used. So let me show you how I would implement that. So back in our user controller, if we scroll up, we're trying to find our store avatar function. So here's what I would do. Before we modify the avatar value to include the new file name, so just before this line, I would keep track of the old value from the database or from our accessor. So I would just make up a variable. I'd call it, old avatar, set that to equal, and then just look on the user object, look inside it for avatar, right? So we have not manipulated it yet. So this would be whatever value is coming from the database or our accessor. Okay, now I don't actually want to delete a file until we've updated our database. That way, even if someone visited our website at some weird millisecond, odd scenario, I would never want a user to have a value that's not actually pointing towards a real file. So in other words, I'm going to wait until we've actually updated the database to point towards the new file. At that point, I'm happy to delete the old file. So down here, I would say if, parentheses, curly brackets, for the condition, I would say if $old avatar, if that does not equal quotes / fallback avatar.jpg. So in other words, we're saying if they actually had a value in the database, if it wasn't empty, if it didn't get converted in the accessor to this, that means they had an old value. So let's actually go delete that old file. So in the body of the if statement, I would say, I would use the storage class or the storage facade. It has a method of delete, semicolon, and then you just give this the path and file name that you want to delete. Now we can't just give it the old avatar value, and that's because, and you don't have to type this in, but old avatar is going to look something like this, right? /storage/avatars, and that's the URL that makes sense for the web browser. But the value that we would actually want to feed into this delete function would be something that looks like this, right? It's a path that makes sense relative to our storage folder, right? In our storage folder, in the app folder, we want to go into the public folder, the avatars folder, and delete the file name. So I would just use a PHP function to turn this into something that looks like this instead. So let me show you what I have in mind. In the delete parentheses, I would just use a PHP function of str replace. Okay, and you give this 3 arguments. The first argument is what you're trying to replace. So that would be quotes /storage/ storage. The second argument is what you want to replace it with. So we don't need a leading slash, it would just be public slash. And then the third argument, that's the string of text you're trying to perform the replacement on. So that would be old avatar. Cool. So then after we delete that file, just to finish things off, let's redirect the user back to the manage avatar form. So I would just say return back, and let's give them a flash message, semicolon, of success, and the actual message can be, congrats on the new avatar. Let's give that a save, and before we test it out, let's delete all of our avatars, just so it will be painfully obvious that we're not storing more than one avatar per user. So if I upload an avatar of this dog, click save, cool, it gets used. We just have that one file now, but if I choose another avatar of maybe this cat, click save, go in your folder, awesome. So it deleted the old file, it updated all of my references, perfect. So now even if I sat here and uploaded 100 different avatars, we don't care. The server's only going to keep your newest copy. That is going to bring this lesson to a close. In our next lesson, we're going to start building out the ability to follow other users. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I'll see you then.